I'm going to turn off my cell phone.
I can't turn off mine because the internet is off. So I'm using mine. I'm hoping no one calls in the next hour.
Okay.
Yeah. Should be
I
fine.
hope.
Oh, but I should mute it actually.
Fair.
How have you been? How's your day so far?
Listen, I'm happy. I'm like, listen, January, you're still going, but we are still going as well.
Nice.
All right.
Has it been a good month so far? Oh, we're live.
Oh, yeah, it has been a good month so far. Hi, everybody who's joining us from all over the world and maybe beyond. Thanks for joining us on this month's Rise and Shine. My name is Josephine Karianjahi, and I am a co-founder at Africa Podfest. And today we are talking about
ethical considerations in international collaborations in audio.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. But before we get started, let's tell the people who we are. And I'll start with you, Lulu. Welcome to the space. Thank you for saying yes to this conversation. And please tell us your names. You can share all your names. Let us know where you are in the world, and also tell us a little bit about where you've been, what you've been working on, and what's exciting for you in 2023.
Oh, okay. So my name is Zulu Jemima, and I'm a producer and media consultant from Uganda. I'm currently in Kampala. So a little bit of a background about me. I used to be a former journalist, or I am a former journalist. And I worked in Uganda for a few years, maybe close to 10 before, and maybe 1 year, and 1 year in Rwanda. I don't know why I'm saying maybe, and 1 year in Rwanda. And then in regards to the topic that we're talking about, so I had reached a point in my career where I realized that people were being hired externally out of Uganda to come and do work that I wanted to do. So I applied for a scholarship to go and study media in Australia for my undergraduate. And then I came back. That's when I picked up a love of podcasting and audio dramas. And then I came back to Uganda, continued working as a producer and media consultant. And then I completed my master's at Oxford in audio drama. And then, yeah, that's a background about me. What am I doing now? What am I excited about? Actually, I'm so excited about, so 2023, I'm doing a digital arts library for Uganda. So it will have audio, it will have film, but I don't want to talk too much about it because it's still in very, very early stages.
All right. Thank you so much, Lulu. And something that I found very interesting is that you are an award-winning audio producer. Please tell us a little bit about that.
I don't know if it's award-winning, but there was, so in 2018, I think I did a podcast episode for Audible. So they were looking for women, like for their Women Day series, and that podcast is award-winning. So I should probably correct that online, but I didn't try that. So that podcast is award-winning, and we're celebrating women around the world, and they asked me to do a segment on it. So yes.
Yes, so I mean, we are taking all the flowers. We are giving you all your flowers. We are recording all of this. It's very good to meet you. I think so. Let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions. You all are going to be asking us a lot of questions. As we are talking and introducing ourselves. If you have a question about international collaborations in audio, if you are experienced in that area, if you have a comment, please do drop it in the chat. And also, we will be sharing your questions and comments as we go along, and we will make time for you to share your questions also at the end and in the middle as well. So, but over to me, myself, my name is Josephine Karianjahi, and I am a co-founder at Africa Podfest. Currently based in Düsseldorf, Germany, but I'm born, raised, and my blood is always in Nairobi, Kenya somehow. And so I've spent many, many years there, grew up there. And our company, Africa Podfest, is headquartered in Kenya. So I wear many hats. I am an advocacy, partnerships, and communications professional. I've worked for over 15 years in the space, particularly focused on Africa, and currently working on Africa Podfest's various projects, including podcast production, continuing to convene community of African podcasters. We have so much love for the audio space because it is one of the fastest growing content spaces across Africa and across the African diaspora. And one of the things that I'm really excited that we've been able to work on in terms of international collaborations is that we've really spent a lot of time connecting with other festival producers around the audio world. We've spent a lot of time also with partners who are invested in various markets, and we are reinvesting knowledge by always trying to connect knowledge across the world. So all our sessions always have something to do with knowledge, something to do with exchanging information about audio. And we ourselves are very curious people, and we have spent a lot of time in terms of research about what's going on across the African audio space. Many of you know Africa is very wide. So when we talk about doing research in Africa, the land mass that we're trying to cover, the people mass, the diversity, the geography, really, it always feels like the minute you leave your own borders, you're going international because you're going across Africa. Yeah. So that's me. I think there's something interesting about, what you talked about. You unpacked a few things about, the need that audio producers do have to connect across different genres. And I know one of your personal favorites is working in audio drama. I want you to maybe tell us a little bit about what makes audio drama so unique in the international space. Why, it's not, podcasting is fairly new to a lot of people, but audio dramas and Africans, particularly in audio drama, are well known around the world. So please tell us what makes that such a central part of your work.
I think for me, why I really champion for audio drama is because BBC used to have these competitions, I think in the early 90s. Yeah, I remember them. And honestly, Africa was leading. We had like Kenyan writers, we had Ugandan writers, like Deborah Asimwe, and they were winning these competitions, right? So I think it kind of evened the playing field in storytelling. But also it goes back to, I know people like to throw around words like culture, but that is how we tell stories. It is what comes naturally to us. So it should be the most convenient, the most familiar way of storytelling, but also it is the cheapest compared to like film or theater. Because like I've worked across all of them. I tried film, I tried theater, I tried, documentary, all of it. And honestly, if we can empower ourselves to tell stories properly in audio, it's still by far the cheapest. So that's why one of the reasons I love it the most.
Great. And also when you talk about it being the cheapest, I remember every time that you get a cell phone, a mobile phone across most markets, I guess in the global South, your cell phone will come with a radio receiver. So there's a little app that's a radio receiver for almost the most basic phone will have a radio built in, will have some audio built in. And so that's, for me, when you say cheapest, it feels to me like most connected. If you enter public transportation, you'll hear the radio on. If you enter someone's vehicle, a bus, shared transportation, you always, even at home, you'll always hear the radio first, regardless of where you are across the continent. So when you've, when you talked about, thinking through pitching for audio and kind of shifting this, mark from being somebody who's budding or aspiring to actually someone who's a subject matter expert. What have you seen in terms of where the market is in terms of audio professionals, particularly from your background? You're based in Kampala, you're working with collaborators across the world. Where do you what do you see as kind of like the most growing space? Is it voiceovers? Is it, where in audio are we right now?
Yeah. Okay. So that's an interesting question. I think I would break it down into 3 segments, right? But before I answer that, I think one of the things that changed audio accessibility for people in Africa, at least, is when COVID happened, right? Because the lockdown made it seem before an organization like Foreign Policy or the BBC would send journalists like all over the country or all over the world, sorry. But then COVID meant that with the lockdown, news still had to happen, but they started to rethink how can we use people in their home countries. And actually, they realized that you have a lot of good storytellers available, right?
Yeah.
So that's I want to like start with that. The problem is, so one of the things is like we are still, so opportunities is commissions, for example. So someone will come to you and they say, hey, Josephine, I have this story. I want to cover it in Kenya or Germany. Can you get me someone to do it? You know, can you get me a subject? The other thing they ask for a lot is, can you do that translation? For example, if it's in French, they want it in English. I've had a few jobs like that. Someone sends me the English transcript and then they tell me to voice it. So there's voicing, there's commissioning. So that's one of them. The other one is also grants and competitions. Now, this is a very, very big opportunity, but sadly, it's still like not well known for people who are coming to the audio space. So I find a lot of people come to me and they say, I want to start a podcast, right? And I say, good, because I did that in 2017. And I know that when you're in that space, you just want to go. It doesn't matter where the money is coming from. It doesn't matter the audience. And now I have a few things that I tell them, yes, start, but also think about like, a year down the road, if you're looking for money, where is it coming from, right? So if you see, for example, a grant for audio drama, maybe don't apply for that, but look at what they're seeking for, the quality of audio drama, what a kind of the length alone, because I've listened to podcasts that are an hour and a half, purely because a friend has said, listen to what I created, what do you think, right? I've listened to really interesting podcasts that are 8 minutes and they've stayed to me for like, I don't know, like 2 years or something, right? So just to familiarize yourself. So the other one is grants and competitions and also workshops, So there's a lot of like emerging artist workshops. Now, a lot of people think it's for visual artists and writers, but because audio is new, you can apply anyway, to those competitions and say, this is my thing, but at the end of it, the product is going to be an audio drama. And then the third one is residencies. This is the one I'm kind of like obsessed about, like residencies and collaborations, project collaborations. So I think for me, actually, it goes back to the podcast that I did with a friend, Karen Bridger. She was like a videographer, one of the best videographers and storytellers in Kampala, right? And I came to her without any knowledge of audio editing. Now she's a storyteller who comes from a visual kind of like background. I came from like the written word. And together we're able to do a podcast that she contributed to like half, if not, like equally. And then I brought also my kind of storytelling. So the good thing with residencies now is that they are audio visual residencies. Because if you look for audio drama residencies, you won't find a few. But if you look for audio visual ones, there are so many opportunities.
Well, it sounds like you've had a chance to kind of look at 3 top areas that that kind of set the scene for us. Talk about maybe the role of kind of audio, specifically audio from the rest of the world in global awards, because that's one area that we're starting to see some of the projects kind of being recognized, and not just audio projects, but the audio visual projects as well coming out of Africa. So we'll focus on the audio. In the last couple of years, there's several awards that you start to see people entering, everything from continent-wide awards. So, there's the APVA awards for voiceover artists and podcasters and other audio artists. There's also other global awards like the One World Media Awards. What have you seen in terms of the award space? Talk about the other global awards as well. If you've seen kind of what's happening, what's moving from international markets into other international markets.
Yeah, and that's a very good question. I think the biggest one is the BBC International Audio Drama Competition. That one has the biggest reputation, it's international, and it doesn't put like conditions. So, and I think, so there's a few awards. The reason I won't mention them is I've come across a few that when they have call outs specifically to Africa, they're like, we want a story that empowers women or empowers children. There's nothing wrong with that. But as a storyteller, I want to be able to tell the story the way you would ask an Australian to tell it or a German to tell it, without putting these conditions on, admission and stuff. So I think BBC is good. And then you mentioned to me one, I think Spotify.
No, I mentioned, in terms of the One World Media Awards and others that are specifically around audio journalism or specifically around journalism, but expanded to radio and podcast categories. And several others have also started to recognize different audio drama projects that are based, I guess, in your experience, from your context, not just from African artists, but from artists and audio producers who are based in different parts of the world. So, you talked about, kind of one of the challenges is, and you kind of switch gears a little bit into some of the challenges is, part of what you mentioned is that, the opportunity comes with a question, can you create a story, but on a topical area? So if we're talking about social and topical issues, please, can you talk about, for example, women and girls education? Can you talk about education in informal settlements? Can you talk about climate change? Can you talk about conservation? Can you talk about a thematic area? And on the one hand, it's great, there are these opportunities, but on the other side, something that I've really learned a lot from is in terms of what we've learned a lot about audio, we've learned from the film space as well. And the film space, for example, Nollywood, a lot of the films are not necessarily topical. They are just about the African stories, about Africans, about, different imagined realities. So what is it like creating in a space where you want to create stories about lived reality, and a lot of the commissions are about topical issues? Nothing wrong with that, but does it limit you in any way? That you feel, kind of like that tension between creating what is and what others would like it to be as well?
I think it's very, very limiting, but also it can be an opportunity, right? So initially, at the beginning, I talked about collaborations. So there are collaborations where someone can come and commission you for a job, right? So if someone is asking you for topics that essentially you believe in and you think should be put on a public forum, but you have something you're passionate about, then go out and find a podcast you respect that is doing that on an international level. Because I really love history podcasts and like anything to do with old kings, And one of my favorite podcasts is Travels Through Time. It's a UK podcast. And I remember listening to it, and they have this beautiful way of storytelling that they pick a year in history, and then they have 3 moments of going back. And normally that podcast hosts like academics and scholars and people who've written books, right? So I kind of shyly wrote to them. I'm like, hi, so I would like to have a Ugandan king featured on there. Of course, they said yes, but I was so terrified. I think if you even listen to the audio, my voice was shaking. But because I'm so passionate about the topic, I then got to be on this literally award-winning. Now that is award-winning, award-winning podcast. And actually from that, then I was able to use that to leverage applying for residencies that I want. Then I could, then I applied for a residency in Berlin as well. I went there thinking I'm going to come out with an audio kind of exhibition, but then I met amazing artists, and I worked with an architect and a visual artist. But what I'm saying is that it allowed me to I have to find wiggle room, because if I sit around for someone to come and say, Lulu, tell me the story that you want. No one wants to hear about my love life, but I want to tell those stories. I'm like, guys, I have a lot that I've learned. No one cares, So maybe I can do the stories that people are interested in, that I'm also interested in, and then hopefully 5 years from now, or not even 5 years, at the end of the year, I could be like, you know what? I have found enough support now to do the stories that I want.
I like that a lot, because I think there's so much, you've said so much, but let me talk about the question of telling a love story from your own perspective, just you, and just kind of what the market is like for that. But, looking a little bit more closely about, you said your voice was shaking. How has your voice, even if it's shaking, even if you're not necessarily sure that this is going to be a good fit, how has, the way your voice sounds, you're energetic, you're passionate about storytelling. What's the kind of, how does your voice play into the kinds of collaborations you've been part of? You mentioned, from English to French or French to English, and, there's a way you talk that's uniquely you, based on where you've lived, where you've studied, maybe some of the people who've influenced you as well. What are some of the things that you know about voice that play into kind of these meetings, preliminary meetings, and also in terms of the working together process?
So that's a very good question, actually, because one of the things that came as a shock to me is realizing that my voice is not, I don't want to say like, it's not the accepted voice internationally. I know it sounds terrible. It's not even the African voice. And it's not because, for example, when someone wants an African voice, they want a specific African voice, you know?
What is just give an example. What is an African voice sound like?
Like think about
like
Nigerian voice, you know, think about like Ghana, like they have like very stronger intonations. Now, I think our accent is a lot more sing-songy, you know, and I've literally like even been commissioned for a job and I've sent audio. I'm like, oh my God, like I can't wait to hear that back. And a producer comes back and says, can you speak slowly? Now, I have learned to take feedback that sometimes that has nothing to do with my voice. And then I start saying, in Uganda, in 1929, you know, like just being like, make it sound deeper, make it sound this, but it also helps to like, I guess, take feedback. I think that, look, I would love a podcast where people sound like me, right? But what would you prefer, Josephine? Would you prefer people sounding like you? Okay, yes. Or being able to take your story on an international platform? So you see, we are still in that kind of like,
it's small hard. I mean, like I'm saying, it's small hard. It's like, you know, it's a little bit hard and a little bit difficult to be like, well, actually, I kind of want a project that will go international. But for me, I feel a lot of pain, you know, in terms of, you know, just hearing that our voice isn't there yet. It's not the desired voice. And
that's
even
true.
even for, you know, I've spoken to different voiceover artists and podcasters and, you know, people who work in radio and television as well. And they say there's a very standard voice that you have to be part of international collaborations. But on the other hand, I'm finding people saying because of, you know, independent media like podcasts, I'm so happy now. I've heard people who sound like me, and now my voice sounds like a voice people want to listen to. And I feel so confident about that. I feel affirmed. I feel like I see myself in the productions. But on the other hand, you know, we're here for a good time, but we also want to be here for a long time, you know, in the space in terms of, you know, working throughout, being able to attract and retain international work, being able to represent ourselves as artists, as collaborators, as producers. So there's a back and forth there in terms of, I really like the way you sound in terms of, you know, I can understand what you're saying, I can understand your accent. But for myself, you know, I do find sometimes people say, hey, can you come again? Can you say that again? The way you said it, I didn't understand it, you know. And I'd say, how would you like to hear it? Oh, you know, the person particularly might not necessarily have a regional accent. They might have what we know as a radio voice, you know, sort of like the one which is heard across the world, and everyone's like, okay, that's a person who's reading news, or it's a person who's on TV as well. So there's something there also about you know, thinking through what gets accepted and also accepting criticism, understanding that it is partially because certain projects are commissioned a certain way, but also you want as many people to hear your content. So where do you leave your voice? Do you leave it at the door? Do you leave it, you know, do you, you know, how much of you gets into the final cut?
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Actually, you know, I find like especially with commissions for voiceover, right?
Yeah.
I think what I do personally is I focus on the script. So if I know the emotion behind the script, you know, I know the intonation, and I really go through the script and I like underline words like giving or professional. There are also some words that I know you would understand, but I just like run over them like professional, you know, like some words just kind of like, so I underline what words I should stretch out, right? Yeah. But I really think, for example, one of the things that really gets me is that Audible has a whole section of people reading like audiobooks. Now, I went there and I'm thinking, with my experience, I'm going to get a job here. Do you think that there are openings for people from Africa? No. Do you know how many books are on there, right? So sometimes like
hundreds of thousands of books and titles.
You know, and honestly, but you find this book like beautifully written, you know, set somewhere like in, I don't know, Nigeria, or Kenya or Uganda, read by like a British Black person, which is good, you know, because the story is still getting told. But we need to work as a team. People also in the industry in the West need to come and be like, you know what, would you give someone in Kenya a chance to do this book, you know? Yeah.
So I've run across this as well, you know, just certain there's a way your voice does get onto like a global marketplace. So there's places that you pitch your work, or you leave your voice samples, or you kind of pitch for. And you know, just thinking around some of those spaces, what category do you put your voice in? Because is your voice worlds? Is it audio? Is it pro? You know, is it other? Where do you put your voice? I mean, that's really like, you know, putting the ducks in a row, as they say. Where do you start from categorizing yourself?
I mean, like I always start with other, like honestly, half sarcastically, but like, okay, like other, and then African, and then African woman. Also, it's very, I don't know, have you seen the category? It can be like,
no, talk about that a little bit.
So there's like America, like African American, you know, West African, and other in some, and I'm like, wait, that's like, and South African actually, and South African and other, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, wait, okay, so in that category, I'm not I don't sound South African, I don't sound West African, or like African American, so I guess I'm like other, you know. But also I have found that sometimes, if I can be bothered, also some of these jobs are like 20, you know, a small commission between like, I mean, less than a few hundred, £100. I just, you know, read for me a paragraph. I'm not going to go and write to the person who's put the job up, right? But sometimes what I've done actually is I have recorded the thing anyway and sent it to them. And people are like, oh, this works. I think it's, in 2 cases, it worked and actually I got more work. Yeah. I'm like, you know what, I don't care. I just said, hi, I know you asked for West African or South African voices, but I took a shot at this. What do you think? Yeah.
No, I like what you've said, because it's like, it is what it is. You know, the categories are as they're laid out, but you saying, you know what, I'm going to still apply other, you know, special. I would say even special. You know, other feels like very broad, but I think it's a special category because they're producers who are based in every continent, and even within the same country. So even if you say African American voice, which part of which continent are you talking about? Are you talking about Pacific, Northwest, African American? Are you talking about Southern, from a specific state? Are you talking about Midwest? Are you talking about the coast? Are you talking about diaspora? Like which category of person, right? And then the second, you know, the question I have is, we want to hear podcasts in specific topics. So I know niche podcasts like, you know, science topics, a lot of business, tech, and a lot of technical podcasts are from creators who are in countries where people understand as the same kind of English. So they know that it's either British English or American English, or it's in, you know, standard French, or it's from another continent. You know, maybe it's Canadian French. I don't know. You know, just giving a bit of a you know, a bit of a broad spread here. So I think the one thing that kind of jumps out to me when you talk about putting your work out there and the reception that you're getting is that you do need to be kind of tenacious. So just if you can speak to creators who are watching or will watch this segment, how do you prepare yourself as, you know, just in terms of when you wake up and log on, or you start, you know, your process? Do you, you know, are these sites, are there websites that specifically you check up every time? And, you know, in the spirit of 2023, we are opening all the gates. We're not gatekeeping any information about where to get this work or where to get connected. What's your process like for a typical collaboration? You may or may not necessarily want to mention for what project, but what's your process like?
Okay, so my process is, first of all, I think always keeping tabs on what's happening. So BBC Sound is good for that, you know. Unfortunately, so they've kind of like, so there's the American market, and there's American market, and there's the European market. So BBC Sound, I think, is more, they would be more likely to take content, because also the American market is so huge, you know, it's so huge, and they have like, anyway, so that I learned, but just keep tabs on like what's going on, what's happening. That's one thing. But they also have a library, because actually I realized, especially with earlier applications, sometimes you apply for like a grant or something and you don't even know the template you know.
Yeah.
So actually, there's the content you want to put out there, but take it back, you know. If you're applying for, and sadly, if I apply for a job here in Kenya, I could send you the same resume, you know. If I apply for a job in Germany, they want a photo on there. So even something as small as like, I don't know, like look up what are the templates they're using, you know. If you apply for a job here with a photo, it looks so strange. But what are the templates they're using? Familiarize yourself with that. What is the language they're using? So maybe some is good because they have different formats. And also listen, you know, because if, for example, if I came to like Africa Podfest and you have a list of like podcast app, right? And I want to send my podcast, it would make sense to listen to what you have up. Maybe it's not even the category, because I think sometimes as creators, we always like, we work independently. So you want to grab at everything, you know, but I use that trick of 3. Like every month I'm going to do these 3 things. Apply to one residency, apply for like one job, apply for one grant, whatever, you know, but 3, and then it helps you narrow down in things that you're interested in. For example, I could be wanting to send something to Africa Podfest, and then instead I would have time, as opposed to sending to you, BBC Sound, The Guardian, Foreign Policy, I have time to send you an email. Hi, Josephine, I'm thinking of doing this. What can you advise? That's another very important thing. Reach out to the person, you know, and say, I think I can contribute to your project or your podcast in a certain way. And people always respond like positively, you know.
That's true. I mean, just sending a quick note and saying, hey, my name is Lulu, and here are some of the things I'm thinking of. You know, I want to work with you in this particular way. And are there any, before we switch into sort of talking about, you know, the ethical considerations, specifically around the kind of work that you do, are there any surprises from, you know, that you started out, you know, pitching in a particular way, and one big takeaway was don't do that anymore or do more, you know, sort of like something that you thought, you know, later on you're like, oh, that was obvious. I shouldn't have done it this way. This is something I should have picked up quickly, but you only got it through experience.
I think one of the big ones for me is not relying on the CV, because sometimes, I mean, we've done stuff, right? You're like, let me send you guys this CV, and boy, oh boy, like this job is for me. I really learned to humble myself. Yeah. So I do not like apply for a job unless I have done extensive research, including who is the person I'm replacing, you know, the story that they're doing. If they have, like, for example, in audio, sometimes someone wants a small thing, but look up what else have they done? Is that a style I'm familiar with? Is that a tone I can do? Are those values that I believe in? Because this is a very important one. Sometimes when people are seeking cultural stories, they have already their idea of what they want. You know, they're like, we're looking for a story from Africa about like the struggles of this and this. I'm like, yeah, but so is this also, I mean, the struggles are there, yes, but are those values that you want to, that you align yourself with, or can you pitch them an alternative? Yeah. So for me, it really came down to like, approach every job as if it was the, you know, the first audio job you applied for, you know, because if I'm applying for like, I don't know, like a history podcast, and I'm like, I've worked as a tutor, I've worked as a journalist, I've worked as a, no, look at your CV and say, while I was a journalist, I did research in like communities and towns, I talked to this. So always like fine tune, you know, specifically to the thing you're applying for.
I like how you talked about, you know, just humble yourself. Like, you've done all these things. You have an amazing CV, you have an amazing portfolio. You even have links, you have a website, which is, you know, optimized so that you can listen to kind of every single piece that you've worked on. You've done all these things, but it's a question of really saying, what does this role want me to be part of? But then let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, okay, so now you have the role. Some of the things that you talked about, you know, you talked about some amounts of money, some £100, maybe £1,000, maybe it's in euros, maybe it's in US dollars. What are some of the things that make you say, ethically, that you've seen it, they're like, I have questions about this, you know, in audio specifically?
That's a very, very good question. So one of the things that makes me go, why actually, and is the fact that a lot of jobs, so I'm a part of some different groups where you can get, like, you see jobs or job postings, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
You will see a lot of jobs advertised for producers based in the West, and they're very clear. You will work between this time and this time. You will be needed. We are paying you this for transport. This is the amount, very clear. And then when someone looks for you, they kind of go through the back end. Hi, Lulu, I kind of want this. I have this job. Can you do it? I have 50, not 50, like I have 100 euros or something, right?
Yeah.
And the same job, they would give someone for 300 euros. Now, for me, it has come down to, like, this is why I go after things that I want. I could easily write to someone, and some of the funnest jobs I've done, I haven't gotten paid and did not expect to get paid. But I knew that the platform would elevate my work or give me some kind of visibility, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The money thing is one thing that I am working towards, like, finding a solution for this, but we need to find standardized ways of contacting and contracting producers on the continent, you know? And just
there needs to be, there needs to be, because you're talking about, like, so that I don't know if there's certain websites, I wouldn't mention all of them, but you can get lots of people who work on contracts. So you can get people to do editing, you can get people to do writing, you can do copy, graphic design. And the minute you post, you know, I'm looking for 5 minutes of audio about topic X, you get 100, 200 messages saying, I can do that. And so the person who's sharing this commission has an opportunity to sort of handpick who they send to. And what I'm hearing from you, and what I've also observed, is that the behind the scenes conversation, there's no, you know, so there's no standardization. You know, I can offer you 2 euros an hour because you're based in Africa, and it's okay. I mean, question mark, you know, there's things, like I said, things that make you say, And if I was to offer someone the same role and they're based here in Europe or in the US or in Australia or another continent, there's now this idea of, oh, what are the labor laws in that country? What can I get away with in terms of international collaboration? And will this person know, kind of like, how can I get it out of them? You know, how can I do that? So something that I've been following for a long time is what's called a Quality in Audio Pact. And it was convened by Broccoli Productions. They're based out of London, their UK production house. And one of the things that they were talking about is that in the audio industry, there's a lot of inequality, specifically around pay. A lot of interns too are not getting paid. So let's say, Lulu, you and I are doing this job. Maybe I don't have as much experience as you. So you say you'll be my intern. You know, and you find that a lot of people who are interning or getting professional exposure are not necessarily getting what you're saying is, you know, you can see this platform may or may not pay you, but you know what the ultimate goal is. But even talk about, like, career starters, what I've seen is there's a lot of people who are not pitching because there's, you know, first of all, there's no pay information. And so the other part of the pact is saying, if you put out gender data and say, hey, we have this, this is a spread of gender in our organization, our company, this is, you know, what we're paying people, is saying also, look at it in terms of also, like, the diversity goes beyond gender. Talk about race, talk about country of origin, talk about, you know, socioeconomic differences. And I mean money differences. Like, if you're going to pay £100 for something in the UK, are you going to pay the same outside of the UK? And what are you seeing?
Though. Yeah. You know what? That's a very good point, because I see these jobs now, they advertise pay according to country you're working in. Uganda, first of all, like, what is a minimum wage in Uganda? If you're going to base off that to pay me, it's crazy. But you're asking me to do the same amount of work. You're asking for a producer, for example, in the UK or Germany, Australia, you know?
Yeah.
No,
and also, like you said, okay, let's say you get paid. You know, talk about what happens when you're being paid. You know, banking systems, PayPal or other payment platforms, money transfer services. How does it work? Like, where does it get a bit murky?
So you know where it gets murky is someone can say, again, some jobs go from £100 for a small, like, thing, 500 more. You know, £500 more money. The thing is, you have to negotiate and be clear. Hi, 500 is okay, but could you please take charge of the exchange rate, not exchange rate, the transfer fees? Could you take into consideration the transfer fees and exchange rate? Because I have gotten money come to me, right? And I'm waiting to enjoy it. And I'm like, what is this? More than half is gone. Because they say, okay, it goes from like a, let's say a German bank actually, yeah, to a dollars account, to a shilling. Then it comes to me in dollars. My bank says, no, we're giving it to you in shillings, you know. So all of those messes, they have to take into consideration. Because that is one of the things that I think, especially for organizations like, I don't want to mention, but news organizations, Foreign Press Policy, Guardian, you know, BBC. BBC is quite good actually, and the rest are also good, but I think I should not have to explain to someone whose bio and profile says international journalist that they need to take that into consideration.
Yeah, you know? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, something that you mentioned that is interesting is, you know, hello to everybody who's at news organizations. Also, how you pay for, like, how you recruit for audio jobs sounds like there's not enough information about how many times, you know, should you say I can edit, or how many rounds of edits will be paid for. How many if the story specifically, you know, involves certain risks or certain you know, sort of like it puts you in harm's way, or it kind of exposes something that maybe is a little bit more difficult, or it's more, you know, it's kind of like a slow burn kind of story. It's not going to pop. You have to build trust. The community that you're talking to trusts you. You know, sort of those longer engagements. How do you have conversations about pay when it takes longer? You know, what does that look like currently?
Okay, so first of all, it's half now, half later. Either you trust me or you give that job to someone else, right? So what helps that conversation actually is like you have to give them also samples. I did this for so and so and so, or I can do this, or give them a person who can. In case you have any questions, please contact Josephine, who I've worked with on this project, right? Longer projects always ask for half before, because also you need running around money. You know, when I was beginning, I used to run around the country on my own money, you know, like running around. No, you need money. For those batteries in a recorder cost so much money. I'm not paying for that. So at least say, look, you can justify, you don't have to, but again, they're more professional. And you know what, Josephine, I've learned something. There are people I have asked for money beforehand and never had back from. So it also helps you to get rid of, because people have so many ideas. People come to me, Lulu, I'm thinking of doing this audio drama. Can you do for me research? Can you write for me someone asked me for like, not a synopsis, summary of an audio drama. I'm like, that is me coming up with characters, situations and stuff. And I give them a figure. I'm like, send this, and I give it, you never heard from them. So also those conversations are good,
No, they're essential as well. And I think anyone who's kind of thinking through some of these suggestions, you know, that's something that I've also sort of thought of a lot. You know, how long does it actually take to develop an audio project? How long does it take to test it out? What levels of approval are there in an organization that, you know, or even if it's one person, how many edits will you have? How many people will you go back and forth with? But I want to talk a little bit, you know, I'm just looking at kind of like, what are some of the ways that people want, you know, when you talk about international collaborations, you talk about values. Are there stories that you're not going to tell because, you know, it's because of who's asking, or, you know, are all opportunities fair game?
So, and this is something I learned from a very good friend, and it's going to sound really terrible, but I won't anymore do stories on HIV or war, like, you know, like war, like child soldiers. Now, some people come to me, I've had like requests for commissions for positive, like, do you know someone who maybe was like, is HIV positive? And then they're like leading this or running that. I'm like, yes, I do. I could recommend a person, but I feel like we fought so much to get away from these stereotypical stories that I would rather promote other stories, you know, like talk about a young person who's building robotics, you know, or talk about, it's not, this whole stories of like strife and struggling, and I'm really moving away from that. What about you in your case?
So, I mean, I've been following a little bit of, I know Africa No Filter has been doing quite a bit of research in terms of what is the persistent stereotype about Africa in storytelling. And they've done a lot of research. One study they did, I think in 2019, that says out of, they were trying to assess in US media, they had analyzed, one of their researchers analyzed about 700,000 hours of audio. Most of that of media, US media overall, and the stories about Africa were more likely negative. They were more likely, they centered only specific countries. So a lot of the stories would talk about Egypt or Kenya or South Africa and Nigeria, but not really in detail. And it was sort of like, usually in the context of some issue that has come up, and probably a negative issue, or as you said, in terms of HIV or disease, which, there are many, many stories about Africa, but a lot of the ones that they found were portraying Africa negatively, and these stereotypes do persist. So it's so important that you've mentioned a lot of the stories that you won't tell or, won't facilitate anymore. I feel like there's always going to be someone who's like, hand me that bag. I'll do that, I'll just, it's fine by me. But there's something that, so when we've done, in terms of collaborations, we've always tried to look for partners who are invested in African podcasters. So they see, people who share the same vision. And so, are you also thinking of the long term for African podcasters? Are you invested in stories that, if you're, talking about social issues, if you're talking about health issues, are you presenting a balanced perspective? Are you fighting misinformation? Are you, what is it that you're bringing to Africa rather than taking away? So for us, it's always been a question of, if there's specific podcasts or audio projects, where are they taking the African story? I mean, it really, really matters to us. And so it means that you end up saying actually no to a lot of stories, not because they are bad stories or that, they're podcasts that you don't want to produce, but where are they taking the African story? And so that's a choice that some producers can make. But then on a one-to-one level, if you call me and say, hey, Josephine, I want you to produce for me this story, I'll say, do I have 5 to 10 minutes of time? But then what I found also that's kind of like a challenge is, yes, as audio producers, are you part of an organized group where you can actually share the pay, where you can share the terms and conditions, where you can share, if I come to you, Lulu, and say, hey, Lulu, I have, let me talk about this £100 a lot, but if I have £100 for, whatever piece of work that I'd like, if you come to me and say, hey, so-and-so offered me £100, because we're in the same kind of like information sharing group, I feel like then we can both say, hey, I know you're offering people £500 or £1,000 because I've spoken to them, because I'm part of a group. I think that makes us all stronger in a lot of ways. It strengthens the side of the collaborator, because then that when you ask somebody that, you give somebody an ask, that they're part of a community. So probably somebody is going to know. There's also a way that, you have a better quality story, because it's coming, I think, from somebody who knows these stories are being developed, these audio dramas are being developed in a context where people are aware of the values behind the work. They are aware of the, issues of pay, issues of representation, but also there's a stronger sense of, okay, I'm not just addressing Lulu, I'm addressing Lulu as part of a group of producers, or as a part of a community of producers. So I think where we are still growing as an audio industry across Africa is this opportunity that we have to actually build community in a way that shares knowledge, that shares these opportunities, that shares networks that we're part of, listservs that we're part of. I know there's several listservs that people have developed. I know there's one called African Audio Producers. So if you are an African audio producer, there's a group for that people do share opportunities there. I want to speak to kind of like people who are watching, who are across the world, trying to work with African producers, African audio producers. What are some things that people should keep in mind, that things we are moving forward into 2023 and beyond, and things we are leaving behind. If you can kind of give your mini list, like where we are.
Okay, so my mini list is quite short, actually.
Yeah.
This whole distinction between expert and assistant, like, because like, for example, if I want to actually, very personal. So I have two examples on this. I remember when I was a young journalist, I went to Kigali to visit, I spent like a weekend before coming back, and I was already a journalist. So I was in a bar and someone mentioned like a conversation like in Rwanda, they are so strict, women are not allowed to wear short skirts. And that is all the research I did. I wrote that stuff up, came and handed it to my boss, and it was published. Up to now, I'm still so embarrassed about that.
Wow. Wow.
So that is I think in my career, that's one of the most, actually, that is the most cringe-worthy thing, right? Another experience, recently, I was in a writing residence in Berlin. I went with exactly what I wanted to do, right? Because I was comparing like the experiences of Afro-Germans in 1930 to the experiences of Afro-Germans now, like in the theater. And actually, a lot of the experiences are the same. In Germany, they're still asking, imagine, some of these are like third generation Germans, they're still asking for the same, like equal pay. They're still asking for leading roles, This is in a first world country. So I go and I'm like, that's it. How am I going to dramatize this? Bring myself in, like, look, like this Ugandan comes to like Berlin and then she compares herself to like Louis Brody, this boxer in this, and then like a few days until like the play was supposed to open, I meet like the people are the actors, right? And they just look at my script like, what is this? Because for them, they cannot reason it. Like the story I was telling was completely different. It goes back to humbling ourselves. So I'm like, actually, and I had done months of research, mind you. I was like, what are your experiences as Black activists in that time, as Black actors, as Black, and eventually we created something together. Right? So this is something that I would call on people to, like, if you have an idea, yes, it's brilliant, go to Josephine and say, Josephine, I have this idea. I'd like to work with some people in Germany or Kenya. What do you think? How would you approach this? What are your views? Who would you interview? It's very, very important. Now, that is a collaboration. I think, Then the other thing, second on the list, is transparency. Now, you don't have to come and tell me I'm getting paid £10,000. That is your business, right? But say, look, this is going to be put on Audible. It's going to be, if I get this, because a lot of people actually commission us in the hope that they get commissioned, So they think they have a brilliant idea. Sometimes they do. Then they come and commission you. But then they kind of like, so it's a good way of saying, look, if this gets picked up, maybe what I can do, you have an international platform, maybe I can recommend you as a producer. So also what are you offering? As opposed to like taking that story, taking that technical skills, what can you offer me? And the best producers I've worked with have been like, hey, Lulu, that was nice. Also, just in case, this is a podcast list of, I don't know, like UK producers, for example, can you join that, Or this is a podcast list of like people who are looking for content. So also offering that back. And then the third one, I don't know what the third one is. We talked about payment. Just come to learn, I think, really just that, because if I did like a story about, again, even any country in the world, my first thing would start up research. Find the producers there and ask them questions. And then lastly is crediting people, because I've had some people be like, oh, we've done this production. No, what is your name? And I credit you as an assistant. I'm like, sorry, put like either Ugandan researcher or like producer or like production assistant, whatever it is, or like just also, like you've worked with someone, you've enjoyed it, give them the credit that they deserve,
They do. And you're right, the such gems, because those are the things we're carrying forward into 2023. I have one thing that we're leaving behind, something called Hey Lulu, I want to pick your brain. So we're leaving behind free pick your brain. We're going forward with pick your brain office hours. So I think in the spirit of kind of collaboration, there's an opportunity there to say, hey, what's Lulu's time? It's not a cup of coffee, although maybe you're a coffee fan. It's not, it's not the best, it's your fee, right? And I think what I'm saying is respecting people's time and saying, you know, I want to do this expansive project with you, but I'm not sure. I want to develop this idea. I think one, being transparent and saying, hey, this is time for, I would like to pick your brain. But two, I want to honor your time as well. What can I do? Where can I direct some resources towards that? Maybe you want to give it away. Maybe you want to come to your account. Maybe you want it in kind. Maybe you want, you know, writer's credit on something. Maybe you want a producing credit. I'm not sure. But I think there's opportunity there for us to leave behind this idea of, you know, let's see and really crystallize when people can approach you. And also for us to set the expectation that even if I'm going to Berlin today to look for producers, their time is valuable. If producers are coming to, you know, my city, then their time is valuable. We need to kind of give each other that respect and that time. And I think that's a big takeaway going forward. And the second thing that I'd like us to take forward is what you've said. Please promote other producers. You have 24 hours in the day, I have 24 hours in the day. We can't do everything. You know, you can do a lot. You can even direct everybody else to do it, but you only have 24 hours, and some of those you have to sleep, or you have to work on other projects, or you have to take care of something that's a little bit more important. So do pitch and put forward other people if you can, and also keep asking people to put forward another name. That's how we expand. We said we're not gatekeeping going forward. That's a big one. For people who've been keeping things here, this is a very limited space. It's like, if you do this, it's a very limited space that you don't grow. So open, to the extent that you can expand your networks, get into trust circles where you can actually share these resources, please do.
Yes.
But in terms of where people can find you, you've dropped so many gems. People want to hear some of your latest projects, podcasts you're working on, audio dramas, your next residency, in 2023 and beyond. Where can you be found on the web?
Well, actually, I think that the easiest, quickest way to find me is on Twitter, because the nature of our work is that our contracts are very small, and it's like I'm doing a lot of like news agency contracting, not always, but on Twitter is where someone can find me. But this thing of like shouting out and recommending. One of the organizations I would really recommend to actually in Uganda one is called Tebere Arts Foundation, and another one is called Yenze. Yeah. Now they are working with young emerging artists. And honestly, as a producer, or this actually maybe goes for who are thinking of funding the arts or creative arts, look for organizations like that. Because I have been fortunate to tutor young and emerging artists, but their voices are so strong, Josephine. So the stories they tell, the experiences that they have, So it goes back to like, if someone like that is entering the industry, can me or Josephine, can we make sure that they get paid enough, that they get the resources that they need, that they get the thing of even that they're given the credit that they need, So if you give someone like that a job, tell them, oh, by the way, BBC is doing this. In case you need help with the application, please reach out to me. I think that's a good way we can help each other as producers. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And, one thing that you've shared also is to find yourself a space on social media where people can find you. If you're able to have a space off, social media, maybe an owned page, a website, and a physical space where people can find you. I know a lot of artists are not online. A lot of producers are not online, but people need to find you and find your work. So I think one thing that you've done, just by being part of this conversation, is don't be shy about what you're working on. Keep talking about it extensively. Be part of databases. I know Africa Podcasts, we keep curating podcasters and their podcasts on our website so people can find them by geography. Speak about your work, be connected to producers outside. Listen into conversations in markets where you don't think you have a voice yet, or you don't have enough experience yet. And I think that really will add to the breadth of opportunity that you have. Also, give work to local studios. If you are trying to record in a certain part of a country, there is an audio studio there is a podcast studio there. Find them, work with them, really give and inject as much into the local,
and trust them.
local, companies that are making audio locally. Buy audio that sounds like the place that you're working in. Like really invest in sound. There's a lot of companies doing this on a global scale. A lot of companies that are trying to do this also on a local scale. And it looks like we're almost out of time.
Ooh,
how I do not know. Thank you so much to Rise and Shine for opening up this space and this conversation. This is January's Rise and Shine conversation. There will be many more coming up. And thank you to the team at Rise and Shine, specifically Sarah Miles, and everybody who will listen to this and listen to this. You can find me on Twitter at SunnyK, at Africa Podfest also, all one word. And thank you, Lulu. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Josephine.
Take care, everyone, and happy January.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.